Welcome back to Indiana at the voice of college football. Appreciate everybody for being here tonight. I see we got Sports Talk with all saying what's up. We got Jackson saying what's up, Hoosier Nation, and Jeff as well. Appreciate all you guys for stopping by, and you guys are not going to want to miss the 6th edition of Indiana Hoosiers Live at the voice of college football. Going to be a fantastic show because of your guys' support. Always appreciate you guys. We got a lot to talk about tonight. It's Michigan State week, and most of the time when talking about Indiana football, when you get to this time of the year, going into November, nobody's caring about Indiana football. They usually have a horrible record. They're struggling, not having any success at all whatsoever. They're like 3-4 right now, 3-5, and they're already, out of any major bowl game discussion. Maybe still on the brink of possibly making a bowl game, but not this year because of Curt Cignetti, Curtis Rourke, and just an entirely new Indiana. Bunch of new players, got a new coaching staff. And I know because we've had a lot of discussions about whether Indiana's legit and Curt Cignetti, is he legit? Well, it's his coaching staff just as much as him. He put together a fantastic coaching staff over the years when he was at Elon, Indiana University, Pennsylvania, and James Madison. All those guys ended up following him to Indiana. So they're just as important to this special season for Indiana as Cignetti. Those coordinators doing a great job. And then all the players that they brought in. Yeah, it's a lot of James Madison guys. They brought over 13 guys from James Madison. But then you also had a lot of other guys coming from other programs, like Curtis Rourke coming over from Ohio. A lot of really solid players moving over from other schools. Miles Price from Texas Tech. Miles Cross came from Ohio. Just so many big additions for Indiana, and it's led to this legendary season, 8-0 for the first time since 1967. And if Indiana beats Michigan State this week, it'll be their first 9-0 start ever in program history. And if they can win 10 games this year, it will be their most wins in program history. They've only won 9 games in a season twice. So this is major stuff for Indiana. So excited for Hoosier fans. So excited for Indiana Nation. I know they're a basketball school, but if you invest in football, you get the right coach and the right players, you can be a football and a basketball school. Look at Alabama. Always been a football school. Now Alabama basketball is legitimately a contender. They are really solid and have had back-to-back really good seasons because Alabama is starting to invest in basketball. Nao's doing a great job with Alabama basketball. So Indiana can be the inverse. You got Indiana basketball, the historic blue blood program that they are. But why can't Indiana football be good as well? Why can't they? I think they can if they can keep Curt Cignetti and those coordinators for a while and keep on building up this program, getting more fan interest, more NIL, more, because money's driving everything. We already know that. Money is driving everything for good or for bad. It's been a lot of bad with realignment. The portal has just been crazy in college football the last few years, but can be a lot of good as well. We're seeing a program like Indiana really benefit from that. And that's why Indiana is doing much better, because they finally decided to invest in football. Got rid of Tom Allen, $20 million buyout, brought in Curt Cignetti, paying him $4.5, $5 million a year. They're going to have to up that, though, if they want to keep him. They're going to have to up it. But Indiana's got more NIL than they've had in a while, and especially for football. They've had it for basketball, but for football, they got money. Because I know a lot of people are saying NIL has only been around for a couple of years. It's been around a lot longer than that. It was just under the table. A lot of programs participated in stuff like that. Now that NIL, everybody knows about it. A lot of programs are really taking advantage of it, but Indiana is as well, and that's why this team is what it is. They don't have 5 stars, but they got some really solid players, and that is what's contributing to the success for Indiana this year, all of it coming together.
College football is even more exciting with some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the voice of college football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Let's start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread. I've got a 40-year track record. In fact, in 2023, at $100 played per game, you would have netted over $9,300. And guess what? I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill, our ace in the hole, show stopper from Wager Talk. 6 years with the voice of college football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick, which went 21-5 against the spread the last 2 seasons. I repeat, 21-5 against the spread. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Steve Dace and Matt Zemek. Become a YouTube channel member or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2024 a winner now.
You absolutely are not going to want to miss Mark Rogers' picks at the Voice of College Football. Does a fantastic job with his record. Picks the spread as well. It's tough to pick the spread. I usually do a pretty good job picking games on my channel at Only Talk Sports when I go straight up. When I just pick the winner, I'm around 65%. There's people that do way better than that, but that's not too shabby. But when it comes to picking the spread, I struggle at picking the spread. That is hard. Steve Merrill, Mark Rogers, they do a fantastic job over there, so you definitely want to check that out. But we got to talk about Indiana-Washington reaction, because this is why Indiana's 8-0. They beat Washington. If they lose this game, they have their first loss of the year. So the historic season, the magical season, is still continuing because they knocked off Washington. And I did do a post-game live reaction to this game when it was over on Saturday. If you want to go check out that live stream, it was only like 20 minutes long. Would definitely appreciate that. But just do a little quick recap here again, talking about this game. Indiana, this was one of their, you could say, worst performances of the year. And it was still a 14-point win. Indiana hasn't trailed yet this season, which I still cannot believe. They have not trailed in a game this season. They're the only one of 2 teams to do that, including Army. Army and Indiana are the only 2 teams in college football that have not trailed. Plus, when you look at the fact that Indiana has won every single game by over a single digit score, they have been dominating every opponent that they have played. And this was one of their worst performances. And they still beat a quality opponent by 14. It's so funny about this season, too, and the fact that Indiana, all the opponents that they have played, everybody's saying that they're trash and they're garbage. But these teams were really solid last year. Washington went to the national championship game. Yes, they're a way worse team this year, but they still got some dudes. They still got some solid players. Jed Fish is a good coach. This was not an easy win. Washington's not a terrible team. Indiana beats UCLA on the road. And UCLA is a team that, how many games they win last year? They went like 8-5. They weren't a bad team last year. I know they lost Chip Kelly, but still, Maryland, a decent team last year. All the teams Indiana beat this season so far were really solid teams last year. Nebraska is probably the one where this year, they're better than last year, but even Nebraska's kind of slipping a bit. They did hang with Ohio State, though. That was very impressive on their part to hang with the Buckeyes. A lot of Indiana fans were like, hey, we blew out Nebraska 56-7, and then Ohio State barely beat it 21-17 on their own field. So, yeah, that's why teams don't always play that well. And sometimes teams play better up to their competition. How many times have we seen teams like Auburn play better against Alabama than they do against a team like Cal? It happens all the time. That's why we watch the games. But Indiana took care of business against a quality opponent at home in Washington. You had game day at Indiana. You had big new kickoff for the Nebraska game. And then you had college game day here for this game. And so many people were trashing the fact that game day came to the Indiana-Washington game instead of going to LSU, Texas A&M, or Notre Dame Navy. I understand it to an extent. But the thing is Lee Corso is very old. And Lee Corso, former Indiana coach in the 1970s, early 80s, that was so cool to see. If you're not a college football fan, then it's not going to do anything for you. But if you are a college football fan and you've watched game day at all for the last 35 years, you got to admit it was pretty, I wouldn't say tear-jerking, but it was heartwarming to see Lee Corso get to go back to his program that he coached for a decade, 40 years ago. A program that has been garbage basically for the entirety of their football history. Have a great season with Kurt Cignetti. And we hope it continues. I don't know. Obviously, opponents in the Big Ten, they probably like to see Indiana go back to being terrible. But people that are, sympathetic to Indiana for the poor history that they've had, or if you're an Indiana fan, which there are some bandwagon fans jumping on the bandwagon, that's fine. You can jump on the bandwagon. It's all right. We'll allow people to jump on the bandwagon and be Indiana fans, but you better not jump back off if Indiana starts losing again. I've been watching them for years. I'm an Alabama fan, but Indiana, they have been horrible the whole time. I've been watching them for about 6-7 years, so I've seen the ugly with Indiana. But if you want to jump on the bandwagon, that's all right. But you got to admit, it was cool seeing Lee Corso be back at Indiana. That was cool to see. But it could have got to Indiana's head. It could have got to their head. Could have made them trip up in this game. And people are like, oh, Indiana's no good. They blew it. Because even, hey, last year when Curt Cignetti was at James Madison had game day for the App State James Madison game, and James Madison lost. They lost with game day there. So it happens. You know, sometimes the game day curse. You get overhyped or you let the hype get to you, and you end up choking up. And this was prime real estate for Indiana to lose. They were favored by 10, but then the announcement of Curtis Rourke and his thumb, and he was not going to be able to play in this game, and it was Taven Jackson, a fairly unreliable quarterback to most. But most Indiana fans know him as the guy that was really struggling last year, really outside of the Louisville game. He didn't do all that good last year for Indiana. And then this year, he's only played in garbage time. So people are like, I don't trust Taven Jackson. I don't blame people for not trusting Taven Jackson. I didn't trust Taven Jackson. And yeah, Taven Jackson didn't do all that good. He wasn't great in this game. And that's why Indiana's offense suffered mightily. Like statistically, Indiana's offensive numbers this year have been unreal. Absolutely unreal this season. Like, they're like in the top 3 or 4 at every category. And this was their worst performance of the season. Statistically, it was by far their worst performance of the season. But Taven Jackson did what Taven Jackson needed to do. He just needed to not blow it. He just needed to not, be the reason that they lost. If they did, he just needed to have a decent performance. And he did. He threw a pick. It should have been interference, though. I've said it before. I'll say it again. It should have been interference on Washington. They got there early. They didn't call it. Is what it is. So they got the pick out of that. Should have been interference, though. But outside of that, Taven Jackson didn't fumble. He threw a touchdown pass to Omar Cooper. Had a rushing touchdown. He can use his legs. And Indiana's defense. This is something that Indiana has not had in so long. Is good offense and good defense. And when one side of the ball is struggling, whether it's just you having a bad game or whether it's an injury like Indiana has right now with Curtis Rourke being out for this game, Indiana's other side of the ball helped them still win. You would not have seen this under Kevin Wilson or Tom Allen, especially the Kevin Wilson era. Indiana's offense was so underratedly good in the Kevin Wilson era back in the mid-2010s. It didn't matter, though, because Indiana's defense was so bad that they would lose games 52-45. It just did not matter. Indiana's defense always blew the games for them. They were horrible on defense. If they had just had a defense, they would have been fine. But it is what it is. You can't go back. You got to move forward. And this season's team with Cignetti and all these great coordinators that they have, Indiana is actually good on both sides of the ball. And D'Angelo Ponce, the player of the game for Indiana football with 2 picks, and one of them being a pick 6. It was tipped by a defensive lineman from Indiana, and then it went right into Ponce's hands, and he took it 65 yards down the field. And that was probably the loudest that I've ever heard Memorial Stadium. Memorial Stadium, it's not Alabama. It's not Texas A&M. It's not Michigan, Ohio State. It's not some of these great crowds. But my goodness, that crowd was on their feet. They were going crazy for Indiana. It was unreal. Just a surreal sight seeing the camera pan away as Pons reached the end zone and seeing all those Indiana fans after decades of losing, seeing that, all of them on their feet. That was loud. I'd have loved to have been there. Great crowd, great atmosphere for Indiana. And it goes to show you that when Indiana wins, they actually have support in football. I don't even know. Some of these guys might be Notre Dame fans. They're supporting IU. I don't know. That's probably a small minority of people, but a lot of people talk about how Indiana has no fans. They've been showing up. Nebraska, sellout. Washington, sellout. And Michigan and Purdue already sold out. You're going to have to get tickets on the secondary market. So impressive for Indiana. The way Pons played, the way the team played, just gutted this win out. It was their most gritty win of the year because really they've had no adversity. And even Curt Cignetti has said that. They really haven't had adversity, but in this game, had some adversity because no Curtis Rourke, their leader, their signal caller, and they were able to still get a comfortable win against a solid opponent. We got to remember, Washington beat Michigan. Yes, it was on their own field. It was at night. And Michigan's struggling, but Michigan's still a good team overall. They just don't have a quarterback. They do have a good team, though. Still a lot of talent, a lot of guys going to be playing on Sundays. But Washington is not a bad team. This was a very impressive win for Indiana, and it helped them move to 8-0 on the year. The first 8-0 start since 1967. It's crazy. It's awesome to see. And I hope Indiana can keep winning. Everybody, like now that people are jumping on the bandwagon, or you still have the doubters out there saying Indiana's terrible, you're seeing now comparisons to, Indiana's this year's version of TCU 2022, where it's one good year and then they're going to fall apart, right? I've seen that being said. And that could happen. I'm not saying it couldn't happen. It absolutely could happen. Or I'm seeing people say, well, once Indiana plays Michigan or Ohio State, they're going to fall apart. That could happen too. But honestly, I don't care. I really don't care. I'm just so excited to see Indiana football have some success. I predicted them to go 7-5, folks, 7-5. And I thought that I was being too bullish. People were saying 3-9, 4-8, 5-7. I said 7-5, thought I was being too bullish. So all those people out there, they're like, oh, they're going to get smoked against Ohio State. Who cares? Even if they do, I really don't care. I'm just so excited to see this season for Indiana football. These fans deserve it. There are Indiana fans out there. And if you are enjoying Indiana's special season and you are enjoying the show, if you guys are here, please like the stream down below and subscribe to Indiana at the Voice of College Football. Whether you're watching on the Big Ten channel or on the Indiana channel and you are not subscribed, would really appreciate it. You're not going to want to miss the ride, the journey. Indiana football is legit now, and hopefully they can stay legit with Curt Cignetti. You want to check it out. You want to keep, being a part of this great ride that Indiana is having. Would really appreciate if you guys would subscribe down below. It helps the channel, helps reach new viewers out there, and there are a lot of Indiana fans. A lot of people just haven't talked about the football team. Now that they're having success, yeah, people are talking about the football team, and it's awesome to see. But definitely appreciate some of you guys for stopping by. We got Rough Rider return saying hello. I appreciate that. Mike 383 says congrats on the great Indiana season. It's awesome. It is so awesome seeing Indiana finally have success. I mean, it's not like, a BYU where, they were great with Zach Wilson. And then, they had a couple down years where they went like 5-7. And now they're undefeated. And people were saying, BYU's the best story in college football. BYU is not the best story in college football. Congrats to BYU. I'm happy for BYU and their fans that they're having a great year. Same with Pittsburgh. Awesome for Pittsburgh that they're undefeated right now. But people forget that Pittsburgh had Kenny Pickett recently. They were pretty good a couple years ago. BYU with Zach Wilson was pretty good a couple years ago. Indiana, I know they had the Penix season. I get that. But it still kind of felt, with it being, the pandemic year and there were no fans, it was kind of gimmicky. And Penix got hurt, put a damper on that year. Outside of that season, Indiana's basically been really bad for 30, 40 years. Whereas Pitt and BYU have had more success by far than that recently. Indiana's the best story in college football, folks. It's not BYU. It's not Pitt. I'm happy for those teams. Both great stories. But you got to give it to IU. Jeff says 8-0, unbelievable, absolutely. Got Adam, appreciate you for being here. Adam says Jeffrey Cignetti isn't getting any confetti. If he doesn't get any confetti, it's all right. Even if he doesn't win Coach of the Year, I think he deserves it. But if he doesn't, you get it, it's all right. It's still awesome to see. Rough Rider returns. I'm glad Indiana's having such a good season, not just for them, for the Big Ten as well. Absolutely. Appreciate it on saying I'm a great analyst. Adam, really do. Yeah, they probably will lose in Ohio State and Columbus, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Sports Talk with Austin said if this was 2023 Washington game, would have been over the first half. Yeah, I agree. If it was 2023 Washington, Indiana doesn't win. Taven Jackson wouldn't have been able to get it done. They definitely would have lost more than likely because Washington was really good. You never know, but more likely they'd have lost. Washington's not as good, but definitely we'll see. We'll never know in that regard, but I do think that Indiana would have had a shot because I do believe Cignetti is a great coach. But Washington, they are a way worse team, but still big kudos to Indiana. Rough Rider returns. I was a teenager when Indiana had the cardiac kids. Most interest I've had in them since then. Absolutely, that was a long time ago. That was a long time ago. Rough Rider returns. You watched a lot of football then. You've watched a lot of football. We got Tim in the house. I'm Cignetti ready. Appreciate that, Tim. Absolutely. And we got DDR 256 says, I don't see an Indiana channel on Mark's list. Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of channels at the Voice of College Football, and more are on the way. Ole Miss is coming. I think Ole Miss is out. Rutgers just is started at TCU, but other channels are on the way. But the new channels, they're not on the list yet. I think when more subs and more viewers happen, that definitely will occur. So if you guys want the Indiana channel to get more visibility, definitely subscribe down below. Appreciate it. Sports Talk is the best story in college football. Colorado going bowling. Yeah, you know, that's why you put laughing out loud, Austin. You know that Colorado's not the best story in college football. It's a great story. Top probably 10 best stories in college football, but not the best. But absolutely do appreciate you guys for being here. But we got to talk about Curtis Rourke, because Curtis Rourke is a big reason why Indiana football is where they're at. Cignetti and the coordinators are definitely driving. I mean, they're the coaches. They're driving a lot of this success. But Curtis Rourke, though, is, you know, that engine, man. He's the engine. He's the guy that leads this team, gets them going down the road and having all this success. And he didn't play against Washington. So will he be available against Michigan State? And it's going to be very key if he plays in this game, because, yeah, Taven Jackson did enough for Indiana in this game, but it was a home game. Indiana's going to Michigan State. And before we even get anywhere to previewing and predicting that game, we got to talk about Curtis Rourke's availability here, because I do believe that is going to be a significant factor in what happens in the Michigan State game. And as you guys can see, Pete Thamel reporting, Indiana quarterback Curtis Rourke has continued to throw the past few days, and there's continued optimism he can play on Saturday against Michigan State. He's been dealing with a thumb injury and had surgery last week. IU's first full practice was today. And from everything that I've seen, because Curt Cignetti did have, you know, media availability today, everything that I'm seeing is that it is positive for Curtis Rourke. That I've seen a lot of conflicting reports on this thumb. A lot of people are like, did he break his thumb? If he broke his thumb, there's no way he'd have been coming back this year. I've seen a lot of people say that, oh, what happened was that he tore his fingernail off, which that's painful. That is really painful. And definitely can impact, you know, the grip on the ball, because if you got, you know, your thumb is just in throbbing pain because you got no nail there, yeah, it's probably going to be kind of hard to grip the ball. But then I've also seen reports say that he's had a couple screws put in his thumb. And if that's the case, I don't know what's going on there. I don't even know, like, how can he throw with that? I don't know. It is a mess with the reporting. That's one of those things with Indiana that a lot of people have complained about over the years, and this goes for basketball too. Indiana's reporting kind of stinks. They're not really transparent. I'm not saying a lot of programs are transparent, but Indiana definitely is not super transparent with their injury updates and reporting and all that. So I don't know. We'll have to see what's going on there with Rourke as the week goes by, but everything that's been leading up to this point so far, it does seem to indicate that he will play against Michigan State. And that is definitely going to increase Indiana's chances to win, because his stats have been great this season. 135 of 181, 1,941 yards, 15 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. And that completion percentage, 74.6% completion percentage, and a 10.7 average per completion. Those are insane stats. And that is why he was beginning to be vaulted into the Heisman contention, Heisman candidacy. He was on like the lower part of the list. He was at like 2,500 to 5,000 odds. He had a shot to sneak into the Heisman conversation, because it is kind of a weak year for the Heisman. A lot of the quarterbacks aren't putting up the stats. Like Jalen Milroe had his moment of fame against Georgia, and then he's tanked. He's fallen off. He's nowhere even near the top of the list. You got Travis Hunter and Ashton Jeanty having elite seasons for their respective positions. Like Ashton Jeanty's putting up way better stats than even Mark Ingram, Derrick Henry, Reggie Bush, the last 3 running back Heisman winners. And because he's at Boise State in the group of 5, like, no one cares. It's like, okay, well, he doesn't need to win it. So he's like 4th in the odds. Honestly, if the Heisman was held today, I'd give it to Jeanty. Ashton Jeanty has been playing unbelievable football. He's been rushing for like 200 yards a game, and he's got like 20 touchdowns on the season in like 7-8 games. It's unreal. It is insane how well he's playing. And then you got Travis Hunter, who's done a great job on both sides of the ball for Colorado, you know, because he plays two-way, kind of like, you know, Dion. So he's good on offense, catching the ball. He's good on defense as a corner. He's unbelievable. So Travis Hunter deserves props. But they probably, neither of those two are going to win, because it's a QB award now, which is bogus. It should go to the best player in college football. I completely agree. But people are wanting to say, oh, it should be Cam Ward or Dylan Gabriel. Cam Ward and Dylan Gabriel are having good years. Don't get me wrong. They're having good seasons. But not, you know, just outrageously great seasons, like statistically, like we've seen in the past with some quarterbacks, like when Joe Burrow's insane year, or even Jane Daniels' stats last year. They're not even close to that. So I don't know. The Heisman's kind of a broken award these days. It was a lot more fair back in the past when they actually would give it to different positions, but now they don't. But all that being said, Curtis Rourke as a quarterback was getting in that conversation. And then he missed this game against Washington, which prevented him from getting more stats. I mean, just say he throws for 350 yards against Washington instead of Taven Jackson throwing for, 120 yards or whatever, and he throws 3 or 4 more touchdowns and no picks. Rourke's going to move up that Heisman list. He can maybe sneak himself back into the conversation by having a great close to the season, especially if he can knock off a Michigan or an Ohio State. That would be huge. But it doesn't look like Rourke's going to have a shot, but it was really cool for Indiana to have a Heisman contender. I don't even think Penix really ever got close to winning the Heisman because he always kept getting injured before the season ended. So his stats never got there. But none of that matters. Well, same thing with Cignetti being coach of the year. That doesn't matter. Just to join the fantastic season Indiana is having. And for Rourke, we just hope that he's going to be back. And I've seen some Indiana fans say that, yes, if Curtis Rourke, if his thumb's still bothering him, he can miss this game against Michigan State and we can rest him until the Michigan game. Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair assessment. I'm not saying that those people are wrong. You could do that. You could absolutely do that, and it might work. But I'm nervous still. Like, okay, Indiana is going on the road to play Michigan State, a 4-4 team that has a very talented quarterback in Aiden Childs. He's very turnover prone, but he is talented. And Michigan State has played all right this season. They've had a lot of close games to like Maryland and Michigan, teams like that, Boston College, and they've won some and they've lost some. So they're all right. They're an okay team. And it's, Jonathan Smith's first season at Michigan State. I think he's going to do great things at Michigan State. He's just trying to build there. It's taken him a little bit longer than Cignetti and Indiana. The schedule, you can say it's been a little harder for them than Indiana, but still, he's going to get him there, I think. He's just got to get Aiden Childs to stop turning the ball over, or he's going to have to get a new guy if it don't work out with him. But they're not a team you can just overlook. Washington wasn't either. But what really sold me on the fact that I think Indiana can win is because it was at home. And Indiana's crowd is becoming a problem with how loud they are. It's not an easy environment when the fans are going crazy. And with Taven Jackson being the backup and all that, I felt like being at home, it would keep his jitters down enough. And as long as Indiana had the lead in the game, they're going to be fine. And that's what happened. Indiana had the lead the entire time. Taven Jackson did show some jitters, but he did enough. He just did enough. He never freaked out completely, and they were all good. Now you're going at Michigan State. And like I said, this is completely different. You're on the road, and Indiana has had only a couple of road games this year. That's why people are saying their schedule is laughable because they haven't even played hardly any road games. I agree with that on that aspect of not playing road games. I still don't think their schedule's been just easy. I mean, these teams are still competent programs. I mean, like beating Nebraska hangs with Ohio State. It's not like these teams are terrible. So Indiana's played at UCLA and at Northwestern. And the common thing with both of those teams is that Northwestern, they're playing on a practice field like lacrosse looking thing. It's not even a football stadium. It looks like a practice field. But it's technically, I think they're a lacrosse stadium. But it barely holds any fans because their main football stadium, Ryan Field, has been demolished to the ground. They're building a new stadium, which is, I guess, long overdue. And Northwestern is trying to pump money into their athletics, even though they're way behind all the other Big Ten teams because they're academics and everything, kind of like Vanderbilt in the SEC. But Indiana, when they played at Northwestern, half the stadium was Indiana fans because there's a lot of Chicago alumni up there. A lot of Indiana alumni in Chicago, rather. There's a lot of Indiana fans in Chicago. So it's crazy how that works. You got Indiana and Bloomington, but then all those Indiana people go to Chicago. A lot of them, get jobs there and stuff. So they were there. And then at UCLA, there's a lot of Indiana alumni in LA because Indiana has a lot of alumni and they're all over the country. So UCLA doesn't fill out the Rose Bowl hardly ever because their team just doesn't have all that much fan interest because there's a billion things to do in LA. So there was a lot of Indiana fans there. So this will be the first time playing in a really, really tough road environment. I want Curtis Rourke back for Indiana in that scenario. I don't want Taven Jackson. So for all the Indiana fans saying that, yeah, we'll be good. It's no problem. We can go on the road without Rourke and win. Maybe Indiana can. Maybe they can do that. I don't trust it. I don't want to see it. I don't want that happening. I do not want to see Taven Jackson out there on Saturday against Michigan State on the road. Indiana can still win, but I don't want their season getting blown up because of that. If Indiana loses, I'd rather them lose with Rourke. But if Rourke can't throw, if he literally can't throw, then yeah, you need Taven Jackson out there, obviously. But if Curtis Rourke can pass the ball, which they are reporting that he can, that's who they need to go with against Michigan State. Absolutely 110%. But do have to shout out before we go on to predicting the Michigan State game, previewing and predicting. Putting the Amazon link in the chat and going to show you guys Mark Rogers' book, Disputed National Champions, College Football's Historical 1990s Reset. Mark Rogers, the voice of college football, has a book. And it's a book you are going to want to read. He has just released it. It's for sale now on Amazon, and I think other book places, but I know for sure on Amazon. And look at the reviews, high, 4.6 out of 5 stars. So definitely people are enjoying the book. That is a Christmas present right there. Absolutely. You love college football. You love talking about national championships. This is the book for you. And Mark Rogers, the voice of college football, he knows college football, and he definitely knows the past. He's been watching it for 50 years. So there's a lot of championships that were disputed in the past because you had the BCS rule instead of the 4-team and 12-team playoffs that we have now. You only had 2 teams playing in the BCS championship game. And a lot of years, there would be 3 or 4 teams undefeated. So people felt like, hey, those other teams should have had, those other teams should have been able to win the championship that year. That's how it worked. That's the way people felt. So it's crazy to dispute all that kind of stuff back in the day. It shows you how different college football was back then versus now. So if you were interested in any of that stuff, definitely Disputed National Champions, College Football's Historical 1990s Reset by Mark Rogers at the voice of college football. You're definitely going to want to order it today or later on for a Christmas present. Probably do so myself. Got a lot of love reading sports books, love doing that. And absolutely, Mark Rogers is definitely the voice of college football. He knows what he's talking about when it comes to football. So you're definitely going to want to check out that. But we got to talk about Indiana, Michigan State, because this game is going to make the next couple of games even bigger for Indiana football. We're talking about the Spartans, because if Indiana can beat Michigan State, then that Michigan game and that Ohio State game become even bigger, and their chances of making the college football playoff go up exponentially. So when you look at Michigan State this season, we have to look at how they have played. Their season has been very interesting so far because they've had a lot of conflicting results. They start out the season with a win over Florida Atlantic, 16-10. That's not a great win, but it was week 1. That's passable, right? Well, they got the win. They didn't play all that good, but they got the win. Then they play Maryland, and they beat them 27-24 on the road. I mean, hey, a road win is a road win in the Big Ten. I'm not gonna fault that at all. A road win is a road win, but still, definitely, Maryland not having a great year. So kind of can chalk that up to, okay, decent win, but not great. Beat Prairie View, that's expected. At Boston College, they lost by 4. Now, when they lost this game originally, I'm like, all right, BC's playing very well. BC's having a good year. Since then, BC's kind of fallen apart a little bit. They're not bad. Boston College is not bad. And Bill O'Brien's doing good. He's doing good work over there in Chestnut Hill. But they're not great, man. They're not great. So definitely with Boston College, this is kind of a game that shows you that Michigan State's mid. They're a mid team, and BC's mid. Both teams are just average. That's why Michigan State's 4-4. I mean, that's the epitome of mediocrity. It's average. So not a great, loss right there, but not the worst. Was a tough road environment. Get blown out against Ohio State. Get blown out against Oregon. I mean, it's to be expected. Most teams are going to get blown out versus those two. They beat Iowa. That's the game where I'm like, Michigan State is turning a little bit of a corner, because Iowa with Ferentz is the epitome of consistency. Literally, the guy goes 8-4 every year, and most of the time beats teams like Michigan State, especially recent Michigan State, not D'Antonio Michigan State, but now Michigan State, the way that they've been playing. Iowa would normally win, and it wasn't home. It wasn't home, and that's what I'm saying. Indiana's playing at Michigan State. Not an easy environment in East Lansing. It's not as tough as the Big House or the Shoe, but it's not easy. Not an easy environment up in East Lansing. So Iowa fell apart and lost that game. Tough loss for Ferentz and the Hawkeyes. And that was a good win for Michigan State. Played pretty well in this game. And I think this game does show that Jonathan Smith has them heading in the right direction. And so much so that I picked Michigan State to be Michigan. I'm like, well, with Michigan's horrible offense, Michigan State's going to go into the Big House and get the win. They didn't. So all of these results to me just signal an average team, an average program. And that's why with Indiana being way above average, are they an elite team? No, they don't have the talent to be an elite team, but they have a great coach, great coordinators, and enough really hardworking players that want to win, want to succeed, and have success in this program, and maybe even have a pro future. Indiana's better than average. They are a really good team. And Michigan State is an average team. But average teams can beat really good teams on a good day. And especially at home. So Indiana's got to watch out for that. Like I said, Michigan State is one of those environments that it's not ever talked about as one of the best. But it's not nowhere near the bottom in college football. It is a very solid environment. The Spartans do love their football. They're kind of like one of those programs where they are supportive of both. They support basketball with Izzo, and they support football, especially the D'Antonio era. And Jonathan Smith trying to bring back the D'Antonio era. Very, very solid program. It's basically been, everyone's known this, like when you had the Big Ten East and the Big Ten West, it was Ohio State, followed by Michigan, Penn State, and then Michigan State was that fourth team in the East that always beat up on Indiana, Maryland, and Rutgers until Michigan State started getting pretty bad. But that's the potential that Michigan State has as a program. We saw it the 1 year with Mel Tucker, with basically it was all Kenneth Walker. It wasn't Peyton Thorne. Peyton Thorne's not very good. It was all Kenneth Walker, and it was all Jalen, Naylor and Jaden Reed. Both those receivers are lighting it up in the NFL. Kenneth Walker's a beast. He's fantastic. It was not Mel Tucker. It was not Peyton Thorne. But, so for me, Michigan State is a program that has the potential to be better. They seemingly are trending in the right direction. And this would be a massive game for Jonathan Smith in the trajectory of this program. Because if they lose, they drop to 4-5. And then they follow their season up with at Illinois versus Purdue versus Rutgers. If they can beat Indiana, they're most likely making a bowl game. You would think they could beat Purdue. Purdue's just really bad this year. And Rutgers isn't all that much better. So 5 wins if you beat IU, beat Purdue 6, Rutgers 7, Illinois on the road. That's very tough. But hey, even Purdue, when they made a QB change, made that game very interesting. So Michigan State, this is a big game, a big, landing point right here to determine is this a team that's going to be 7-5 or maybe 5-7, 6-6. So they're going to do everything they can to win. Now, looking at their team, like I said, it all relies on the backs of Aiden Childs and his turnover, proneness, because he's very up and down. His completion percentage is 61%. It's not great compared to some really good quarterbacks, but it's not awful. I feel like with modern day quarterbacks, people are expecting them to complete 70% of their passes, or if not, they're horrible. I mean, 61% is not bad. 1,600 yards, 7 touchdowns, though, non-picks. That's his issue, and that's what Indiana's got to capitalize on. Will Rogers for Washington came into the Indiana game doing very well, not turning it over much. 2 picks, both pawns, but 2 picks against Indiana. So if Indiana can force Aiden Childs into mistakes, that would be huge for Indiana. Now, Tommy Schuster's come in and done a little bit for Michigan State, but Aiden Childs is the guy. He's the main guy. And I think Jonathan Smith really likes him. That's why he recruited him to Oregon State and then brought him over to Michigan State when he took the job. But he's very turnover prone. We'll get into the running backs. Nate Carter, K-Ron Lynch-Adams, 2 pretty solid backs on the season, 2 touchdowns and 3 touchdowns. They don't have a lot of rushing touchdowns on the year, but when you look at their rushing average, 5 yards a carry, 4.8 yards a carry, not a bad running game. And obviously, Childs can run too. Childs has 3 rushing touchdowns of his own, so he's got 10 total touchdowns and 9 picks. So they have a pretty decent run game. Not as good as Indiana's, but a pretty decent run game. Obviously, the receivers, they got a couple decent guys, but nobody really jumps off the page. They don't have a stud at wide receiver. They do have a good kicker. That's another thing. Indiana's had the benefit recently against Nebraska and Washington, 2 teams that have really struggled at field goal kicking this year. Michigan State doesn't have that problem. Jonathan Kim, like the only thing he's done wrong is he's missed an extra point, but he's 16 of 18 on the year with field goals, and he can kick long field goals. He can kick 50-yarders. So Indiana's got to keep Michigan State out of field goal range. This guy's going to hit him. Very good field goal kicker. And their defense is not bad. I mean, when you go back and look at their schedule, I mean, they've had a lot of games where they've only given up like 25, 24, 20. I mean, their defense, it's not the worst. It probably, if I had to guess, because I mean, I haven't really looked at it, but I do think like they rank in the middle in the Big Ten on defense. They're not an elite defense, not a bad defense. They're a pretty good defense. So Indiana's not going to just be able to, have an average day on offense like with Taven Jackson and get by. This is a pretty decent defense overall. I will say that it definitely helps that Indiana's offensive line is a whole lot better because in the past, they got Mac trucked by even bad defenses, how bad their O-line was. They can actually stop teams now because Washington had a pretty good D-line. Indiana protected Taven Jackson. So definitely key there for Indiana to be able to keep whether it's Rourke or Jackson upright with, some of these better defenses. They are doing it. But now we got to predict the game. We got to predict Indiana, Michigan State. Indiana is favored by 7. And to me, I think that is withstanding if Rourke is available. Because against Washington, they were favored by 10. And then they lowered it to 6 once it was announced that Taven Jackson was going to be the starter. And all those people were betting Washington. Well, they were wrong because Indiana did win by 14. And I picked Indiana to win by 11. So I was pretty close. But this game, they're favored by 7. If it's announced that Rourke is not going to be able to play, I imagine that drops to around 3. I feel like the bettors think Indiana's 4 points better with Rourke than Jackson. That's how the odds work, though. Obviously, the way Indiana's played this year, I think with Rourke, they're about 10 to 14 points better. That's not how betting odds work. They're not going to have Indiana favored by 15 against Michigan State. It's just not how it works. Same thing with the NFL. Like the Chiefs that are undefeated and are playing fantastic football are only favored by like 5 against most teams, even though they're, been winning against everybody and they usually win by more than that. So that's just kind of how odds work. Looking at Indiana, though, you see the drop-off. Taven Jackson, 62% completion percentage. It is a small sample size, but he kind of is what he is. He was 11 to 19 against Washington. It's all right. Not great, though. Rourke, 74%. Taven Jackson, 4 touchdowns, 1 pick. Rourke, 15 touchdowns, 3 picks. Rourke's just better. He's more experienced. He's more composed. He's a lot more trustworthy than Jackson, especially on the road. This is not a home game. This is a road game. It's not going to be easy for Taven Jackson if he's back there. Rourke has had a ton of experience at quarterback, even when he was at Ohio. They beat Iowa State when he was quarterback. That was a big win for Curtis Rourke in Ohio back then. Beat Iowa State a couple years ago. And it was at Iowa State. So he can win road games. He can win big games. And he's done it this year. Taven Jackson didn't win against UCLA or against Northwestern. It was Curtis Rourke. So Rourke definitely very key. And I've already talked about his injury. Looks like he's going to be able to play. Not 100% sure, but it'd be huge if they can. Thing that's been great for IU behind that O-line is the fact, look at the running backs. Justice Ellison, he's not going to get any big awards at the end of the year. And he probably won't even get drafted high, if at all. But look at the season he's having. 102 carries, 637 yards, 9 touchdowns. Just an underratedly good year. And the thing is, if you take Tyson Lawton's carries of 88 carries, 434 yards, and 8 touchdowns, and you put all of that on Justice Ellison, or if you give all of Justice Ellison's numbers to Tyson Lawton and combine those two stats together, Indiana's got a really good run game. Both these guys are combining for over 1,000 yards. Last time Indiana had a 1,000-yard running back in a season was Stevie Scott, and he basically did that all by himself back in 2020. These two guys are combining for over 1,000 yards right now with 8 games. Ellison might get 1,000 yards by the time the season's over. If you definitely count them they're going to make a bowl game, so they're going to have 5 games left. So in 5 games, he just has to have like 80 yards a game, which he's averaging over that right now. Or if they make the playoffs somehow and win a couple games, that would be insane. Not expecting that to happen. It'd be great, though. But Indiana's run game, very solid. And since these guys are splitting the numbers, they're not really getting a lot of individual recognition. But both are having good years. And Kalen Black, Elijah Green are competent as well. They don't play much, but I mean, look at Elijah Green. He hasn't played in like 3 games, and he's got 5 rushing touchdowns. Definitely. I mean, those guys can play too. Just, I think, definitely Cignetti trusts Ellison and Lawton more. but those other two guys are capable. Surratt's great. 33 receptions, 590 yards. Look at these statistical averages with the receivers. You've got Elijah Surratt at 18 yards a catch. Cooper's at 22 yards a catch. Unreal. And you've got 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns. They're splitting between all these guys. Miles Price and Miles Cross, the 2 Miles, differently spelled names, but both are great. Having good seasons. Keyshawn Williams is a good slot guy as well. Zach Horton's a great tight end. Doesn't catch a lot of balls, but he's very underrated. Just a very solid receiving room. And they've lost a couple guys. They've lost E.J. Williams to the portal, lost Donovan McCulley to the portal. Hasn't mattered. Indiana's kicking game. They haven't had to use their kicker a lot, but he's been really good. And their defense, it's better than Michigan State. Statistically, it's better than Michigan State's. Aiden Fisher, 75 total tackles. Michigan State's leading tackler only is 48. And when you look at sacks, Michigan State's leading sack guys, 3 sacks on the year. Indiana has Mikael Kamara with 7 sacks on the season. He is getting pressure on the quarterback. When have you ever seen Indiana get pressure on the quarterback? It don't happen. And whenever you ever seen Indiana in the last few years have a great run game. The O-line's better, protecting the quarterback. It wasn't their fault Rourke got hurt. Rourke just threw a pass and hit his thumb on an arm of a Nebraska defender. So it's not the O-line's fault. O-line's been good. The defense has been really good. And like I said, if they can force Childs into mistakes, that's going to help out IU significantly in this game, big time. I think that with Childs being very turnover prone, that's going to make the Indiana defenders smell blood. They know that Will Rogers was a better quarterback and not turning it over. They forced 2. Same guy in Pons, but it's still really good defense from Indiana. So I think that the key to this game, it's going to come down to who's playing quarterback for Indiana. If it's Rourke, their chances of playing or their chances of winning increase significantly, but his chances of playing are very high. So I'm going to predict this game that he's playing. I'm going to predict it in the thought processing that he's going to play. So I think he'll play. I'll predict the game in the fact that I think he's going to play. But if it's Taven Jackson, I'm nervous. I'm very nervous. I think Indiana still has a shot to win with him because he did beat Washington, but the game's on the road. So it just makes it completely different. Michigan State is not an easy environment. So Indiana, I think, is the better defensive team. And with Rourke, they're the better offensive team. With Jackson, I think it's about even. Maybe you can lean Michigan State because they got the more dynamic quarterback despite the turnover issues that Childs has. But with Rourke, Indiana's a better offense. But I believe it's a tough game. It's all Peacock, too. So not even a lot of people are going to be able to watch this game, which it sucks. I mean, Indiana getting all this hype and coverage. And then you get a Peacock game, but the obligations in the contract, you have to have a Peacock game. It is what it is. But I think with Rourke, which looks like he'll play, I'm going to go with Indiana to beat Michigan State 28-17. I'm going with the exact same score as they did against Washington, that I predicted against Washington, 28-17. It just feels about the same to me. I don't think Indiana's going to put up a ton of points in this game, even with Rourke, because there might be some rust with the thumb. You never know. There might be some rust with the thumb, and I think the crowd's going to be a little bit tough on Indiana, but I think they're going to be composed. I think Signetti's going to be like, hey, this is probably the toughest game we've had, especially when it comes to, the crowd and the environment. It's not going to be easy, but I think, he's going to have them ready for the game, and I think, Rourke's going to have the offense doing better than Jackson, but they're going to have some issues with Michigan State's defense. I don't think they're going to put up 40 in this game because it's on the road. If they were at home, I'd probably say they'd score close to 40. But I'm going to go with them scoring 28. And then Michigan State, I think, gets 17. Because you look at a lot of their points this year. Against Michigan, they scored 17. Against Boston College, they scored 19. Against Maryland, they did have 27, but Maryland's the worst defense. So they're always kind of in that 20 or low 20s, high teens range. And I think Indiana's a better defense than a lot of those teams that Michigan State's played. So give me the Hoosiers to start for their first time ever in program history, 9-0 for the first time ever, and keep their college football playoff hopes alive and make those games against Michigan and Ohio State that much more important and that much bigger. But before we get out of here, and definitely appreciate all you guys for being here tonight. Also want to put in the chat as well, if you guys want to follow the Voice of College Football X account, where you can find all the shows, including Indiana at the Voice of College Football and all the other shows, Ole Miss, the Michigan, Ohio State. A lot of people already know about those channels, but if you want to check out any of the channels of the Voice of College Football and know what we were doing at the Voice of College Football community, check out the X account or the Twitter account. Well, I still like calling it that. Definitely you want to follow over there. But before we get out of here, though, and because I'm definitely going to read your comments as well, I do want to talk about briefly Indiana's college football playoff odds. The college football playoff odds are a big deal as well because people are starting to actually give Indiana a chance to make the playoff legitimately. Like the last few weeks, they've been hovering around like 40%. I think Indiana's odds I've read are now at 63% to make the college football playoff. And a game like this against Michigan State doesn't really move the needle all that much, even if they win. If they lose, Indiana's going to tank in the odds. Literally, they'd have to win out to get in because of Indiana's soft schedule and the way things are kind of shaking out with a lot of undefeated teams still like BYU, Pitt. You need those teams to lose if you're Indiana if you want to get in with a loss, even maybe 2 losses if you make the Big Ten title game and you lose. So Indiana's rooting for those teams to go down. But then teams like Alabama that have 2 losses, if they lose again, that's going to eliminate them. So there's a lot of stuff at play. Definitely, don't want Alabama to get eliminated either. It would be really cool for Indiana to make the playoffs. Teams like, A&M lose again. That would help. But Indiana's chance is 63%. A win over Michigan State doesn't really increase it that much. You just can't lose this game. But then against Michigan and Ohio State. Michigan, you would think Indiana they're going to be favored in the game. You think they have a great shot to win, but it's not like Michigan's a pushover. That's not a pushover. Michigan's still a very talented team. You can't overlook the Wolverines. Then you have Ohio State. If Indiana loses to Ohio State and then Purdue, oh my goodness. If somehow Indiana, even with a loss to Ohio State, they have 1 loss, it looks like they're going to make the playoffs, and then the spoiler makers, Purdue, blows everything up for IU and beats Indiana, that would just be a nightmare scenario. That would be horrible. But I think that Indiana's odds are really good right now. They have one of the highest odds in the country because basically the betting odds are predicting IU to go 11-1. And honestly, it would be better for Indiana if they don't make the Big Ten title game. This is one of the only scenarios where it just doesn't help you to make the title game. Because if Indiana's 11-1 with the only loss to Ohio State, but then they make the Big Ten title game, what's going to end up happening is if Indiana loses in the Big Ten title game and they go 11-2, that might bump them out of the college football playoffs. If they win the Big Ten title game, they're in automatically, obviously, because you get the automatic bid winning the conference. But you do not want to lose that game. You don't want that game. Honestly, you just don't want Indiana in that game. You want Indiana to be 11-1. You have a loss to Ohio State. The Buckeyes end up making the Big Ten title game and play Oregon. Right? That would be the best scenario for Indiana, honestly. Unless Indiana beats Ohio State and they go undefeated, then it doesn't matter what happens in the Big Ten title game. It don't matter at that point. But that's assuming Indiana has a shot against Ohio State, which they do have a shot. They have a shot to beat Ohio State. Nebraska almost beat Ohio State. It's possible, just not, super likely. It could happen. But that's kind of where Indiana's at right now. 11-1, Indiana's in. 12-1, Big Ten title game victory, they're in automatically. 11-2, it's going to take a lot of other teams losing. 10-2, Indiana losing to Michigan and Ohio State, or at Michigan State this week, and Ohio State, you're probably out. In most scenarios, like Alabama already has 2 losses. But see, if Alabama goes 10-2, they're going to make the playoffs. They're going to get in because it's Alabama and a tougher schedule. With Indiana, if they have had some of the schedules they had under Tom Allen and they went 10-2, they would get in a 12-team playoff. But with this schedule being easier, probably not going to make the playoffs at 10-2. You would need a whole lot of chaos. So that's where Indiana's looking at right now. They can make the playoffs. I actually think they have a legit shot, but they have to beat Michigan State this week. And they probably have to beat Michigan no matter what. And they can't lose to Purdue either. That Ohio State game is the only one they can afford to lose. And then you probably don't want them playing in the Big Ten title game. That's how I see their odds. They technically, you could kind of say, control their own destiny. Obviously, they do. If they win out, they're in. They're in. But if you lose a game to Ohio State, things get weird on whether they make the Big Ten title game or not. And it's just of my opinion that it would be better for them to not make the Big Ten title game, which, again, to most teams, that's like sacrilegious. Like, why do you not want to make the Big Ten title game? That's a chance to win the conference. I'm just assuming that if Indiana makes the Big Ten title game, they're going to be playing a team like Oregon. And the way Oregon's playing this year, Indiana's probably not beating Oregon. Could they beat Oregon? Anything's possible, yes. But most likely they wouldn't beat Oregon. And then they would end up having 2 losses, and then they would probably miss the playoffs because they would leave a team like Indiana out. I know they would. They're not Alabama. They're not Texas A&M. They're not Penn State. They would leave them out, and it would suck. But again, just to say at the end of the day, if Indiana does miss the playoffs, it's no big deal to me. I never thought they would have even gotten close to this. I'm relishing the ride. I'm happy for IU fans. And most importantly, I just hope this isn't a one-hit wonder. Even if like Indiana goes 10-2 this year and the next year with Signetti, they're like 7-5. Okay. Kind of sucks that they're not as good, but 7-5 is still great for this program. So it doesn't matter. I'm just excited that Indiana's where they're at right now. So happy for the fans that they're 8-0, and we'll see what happens one game at a time. Not trying to get ahead. Obviously, for content purposes and talking about the future, that's what people, they always want to look ahead. So that's why we're talking about it here. But if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be talking about this right now. I would just be looking at this game, and I wouldn't even be thinking about that. But we got to think about it because it is relevant. Indiana has a chance to make the playoffs. And people, even on ESPN and some of the big networks, they are starting to project Indiana in the playoff. A few of them. A lot of them are still leaving them out, but more and more people are like, they're undefeated. They're in the Big Ten. They could go 11-1. Yeah, I'm putting them in the playoffs. So it's awesome to see with that. It's giving Indiana even more recognition, more fan support, more NIL, and money's coming in. Man, if Signetti stays, this could be a long-term thing for IU. That would be so awesome. But I hope it's not a one-hit wonder like TCU with Sonny Dykes. Hopefully that's not the case. But Indiana having a magical season so far, taking it one game at a time, and we'll definitely have to see what happens on whether they have a shot to make the college football playoff or not. They do have a shot, but this game against Michigan State is going to go a long way in seeing whether they can make it or not. But definitely appreciate all you guys for being here. Read your comments before we head out. Jeff says Indiana's having a storybook year. It is. It is so awesome. Rough Rider returns, says Iowa made the Spartans look good. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if it's more because Iowa was not great or Michigan State just had a really good game. Jeff said Peyton Ramsey and Olani was a good quarterback. They also did not have a defense either. Yeah, defense wasn't terrible those 2 seasons, but wasn't great. Peyton Ramsey had a noodle arm. Yeah, I mean, his arm was way worse than Penix, but he could take a hit, and he definitely had legs. He could run, so he was pretty solid. But definitely appreciate the letter B for being here. So that's his first true road game for IU. I agree. That's what I mentioned earlier. You saying the exact same thing. I agree. So many IU fans at UCLA Northwestern game on the road. This is the first time Indiana's playing in an actual road environment. That is not great for IU. That's why I'm a little nervous, especially with no Rourke potentially. That could be bad. With Rourke, I think they're fine. I do. But it's not going to be easy at Michigan State. Sports Talk with All said, you know what? This reminds me of Indiana's beating them all the teams they should, but lose their 2 biggest games. Yeah, that could happen. I could see that 10-2, lose to Michigan, Ohio State. I mean, Michigan's still a good team. They just don't have a quarterback. But Jack Tuttle just retired. That's relevant to Indiana fans. Jack Tuttle just retired. And not surprising. He's been injured all the time. I mean, honestly, he's still in college football because of the extra years and all that. But, I mean, he wasn't a great quarterback. That's why, he never started at IU. Best of luck for Jack Tuttle. Best for his future. Whatever he does with his career, hopefully he's successful. But, yeah, it wasn't going to be at quarterback. It just was not. So, Michigan's probably going to be going with Davis Warren. They still got Alex Orji in there. He can run. But, man, he's just very, very turnover prone. Kind of like, Aiden Childs, and he can't throw nowhere near as good as Aiden Childs. So Davis Warren's probably their guy. But yeah, letter B said Michigan State outgained Michigan by 87 yards. The missed chip shot field and the Childs turnover is the difference. Yeah, Childs is the problem for Michigan State at times. He's the reason they have some juice in their offense, but he's also the reason they lose because he turns it over so much. Yeah, Michigan State honestly should have won. I picked them to win. I thought they should have beat Michigan, and they really should have. Sports Talk with All says, can Michigan or Ohio State be NBC Saturday night? Letter B says NBC schedule was set preseason. Well, I have no idea on that. I think one of those games is going to be big noon kickoff, kind of like, the Indiana-Nebraska game was, and one of them might be on CBS. They could get a CBS game at 3:30 or something, but we'll see. I mean, definitely, I think those games should be on national television. Fatboy44, appreciate your stop by. So let's go Hoosiers. Absolutely. And if you're enjoying the show, I don't know if you are subscribed, Fatboy, but definitely you do want to subscribe to Indiana at the Voice of College Football. If you're watching over on the Big Ten channel, definitely would appreciate if you guys come over and sub to Indiana at the Voice of College Football. Absolutely trying to get more Indiana fans over to Indiana at the Voice of College Football because you're not going to want to miss any future content because it's not always going to be on the Big Ten channel. But do appreciate you for stopping by. Fat Boy says Indiana has covered every game this year. Ride the spread to the wheels fall off. Absolutely. I mean, you got to keep picking IU until they lose. That's what I've been doing. I haven't picked against them once. I've picked Indiana to win every game this year. And I think outside of the Nebraska game, I've picked them to cover every year. I think I had Nebraska covering. Indiana was favored by like 7. I picked them to only win by 4 because I really thought it'd be close. But then Indiana blew the doors off of them. But, man, it's crazy. Letter B says Kamara has been a great transfer from James Madison. Absolutely. He's an NFL guy. If he doesn't go pro, something's wrong with the NFL draft analysts, like scouts or whatever. He is good. Indiana should have some guys in the NFL next year from this year's team. Letter B says 0 chance Purdue wins. I mean, I would say absolutely, but it shouldn't. Absolutely, it shouldn't happen. But you never know. It's football. IU needs Notre Dame to lose. I agree. Sorry for Will, but honestly, it would help Indiana if Notre Dame lost. It would. But definitely be crazy if both of them get in. That could happen too. Especially if Indiana goes 11-1. Letter B says they have to go 11-1, play Ohio State close. I agree. I mean, if they get blown out by Ohio State, I still think they would get in at 11-1, but the closer they lose, the better. I agree with that. Letter B said Penn State and Oregon went out. IU's left out even if they went out and beat Ohio State. And that's what needs to happen. That would be the best scenario. Letter B said, we'll have Tennessee or Ole Miss in the playoffs for some payback for those bowl games. And the thing is they should have beaten Tennessee. That bowl game will live on in my head forever with how stupid the ending was. Indiana should have beat Tennessee in that bowl game. They had the game. Literally, Tom Allen not putting out the potential for the onside kick special teams. Unreal that you have the normal special teams out there. Tennessee kicks the onside, gets the ball back. And then Indiana's offensive play calling, Peyton Ramsey, even with his noodle arm, as everybody says, he was doing great in that game. He was doing fantastic in that bowl game until the end, when they just decided to be conservative and not throw it downfield or do anything. And Indiana lost. They had the Tennessee game. They should have beat Tennessee. And that would have been their first bowl win since 1991. Honestly, Indiana should have beat Duke back in 2015 in that bowl game. That was a dumb game with the field goal that went over the stick, the upright or whatever, and they said it didn't count. That was insane. The Tennessee game, they should have won. Ole Miss, they hung with them, and they were driving at the end, but then Jack Tuttle, I mean, he just wasn't Penix. If you had Penix in the Tennessee game and the Ole Miss game, they win both. But even Peyton Ramsey, they should have beat Tennessee. But it was the play calling of Tom Allen. That's what eventually led to him getting fired. Just a lot of bad decisions. It is what it is. Fatboy 44 says, y'all said the same about beating Nebraska Wild. Now it's Michigan State and they're certified. Yeah, people are going to do that. They're going to do that, right? Like every game Indiana wins is like they're no good. It doesn't matter. We got to just enjoy the ride. And that's what I'm doing. Prove the doubters wrong. Indiana just keeps on winning. And even if they lose to Ohio State, Michigan, it is what it is. I'm excited about the season. So happy they're 8-0. But appreciate everybody for being here tonight. Like the stream down below. Subscribe to the Indiana channel or the Big Ten channel if you're watching over there. Would appreciate if you guys subscribe to the Indiana channel. Definitely helps the channel out. And you guys are not going to want to miss any of the content we have coming down the pike. Indiana having an historic season. And hopefully they can keep on their historic season with a big win over the Michigan State Spartans in their first really big road game of the year to move to 9-0 on the season. Hopefully that will happen. Appreciate everybody for being here, and go Hoosiers, everybody.